Good morning. This is Pat O'Connell calling to order a special open meeting of the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission. It is Friday, January 19th at 11 a.m. Mr. Cameron, could you call the roll?
Commissioner Ellington,
Present.
Commissioner O'Connell,
Present.
Commissioner Aguilera.
Present.
All commissioners are present, Mr. Chair, and you have a forum.
Thank you. So next item is Pledge of Allegiance and the state pledge. Thank you. Okay, commissioners, we have an agenda in front of us. Are any changes to the proposed agenda?
No changes from me.
Thank you.
None for me either.
Okay, so voice vote, do we approve the agenda? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Next up, public comment. Did we have anyone register for public comment?
Mr. Chair, we do not have anyone registered.
Thank you. And then of the folks assembled in the room here, anybody interested in giving public comment? No? Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so the agenda, we've got this special open meeting is about a very interesting topic of when, what filing is required for this Hidden Mountain substation. We've got the order of agenda. We'll have a presentation by P&M, presentation by staff. I think, commissioners, we didn't really discuss this before the meeting. Do you want to just have them go through the presentation, or do you want to be asking questions during the presentation? Or I guess my preference would be, let's hear each side give their version of what has led to today, and then we could have an interactive discussion. But I certainly don't want to limit anybody's opportunity to explore what you need to explore here.
That's fine with me. I do have questions, so as long as.
Yeah, I have questions also. Yeah. Okay, so P&M, will you please? And then you're the first beneficiaries of our new improvement, which is a monitor, so you can actually see what's on the screen behind you. We are making improvements by the week here at the
We're waiting for one of that.
Oh, so it's a blank monitor.
Oh, we can't see the presentation? I'll just go.
Pretend or look, maybe you'll see the reflection of it. Yeah, it's a blank.
Happy Friday, commissioners. I'm Mark Fenton, Executive Director, Regulatory Policy and Case Management. I know you all know me. I don't know if you all do know Lori Williams. Lori's our Executive Director. She's next to me here, of Integrated System Planning. That group includes what we call our Integrated Resource Planning Group. It also includes our transmission planning and transmission engineering. And I think most of you know Stacy Goodwin. She's our Associate General Counsel. She's been with us for quite some time. I have several copies of our presentation. It's up there. It looks like Patrick or someone put it up there. Does anybody need a copy, or anybody in the audience need copies? We have some extra copies. So we've prepared about 15 minutes to go through our slides. I'll briefly go through slide 2, which has to do with the regulatory actions we've taken to date. I think you probably know that, but just to get us all grounded on what we filed and what's been filed so far related to this case. Lori's going to go through slides 3 through 7, which really provide details on the project schedule, what the costs are, what kind of growth we're seeing in Valencia County. she'll address that, and then Stacy will conclude. She's going to cover really what our legal position is. Oh,
Oh,
I saw you. That wasn't. So let's go ahead and flip to slide 2, Patrick. Regulatory actions to date. Prior to making this filing, PNM met on December 15th with staff. And at that meeting, we went through a presentation that was very similar to what we're going to do today, but quite a bit more. It was more detailed. There was more information. This is a truncated version of that. At that presentation, we didn't really discuss the 440. We said we were going to be filing a 440. There wasn't any discussion of a need for a CCN. Mr. Rilkoff had contacted me following that presentation, and it indicated that staff took the position that a CCN was required. So we made our Rule 440 filing on December 22nd, filing number 1295. And when we made that filing, the new Rule 440 has a form, and it's pretty truncated, but because there was a question about whether a Rule 440 filing was appropriate or whether a CCN was appropriate, we included a cover letter with that filing, and we kind of went back to the old 440, and we provided more detailed justification for the need for this project. It's hard in the 440 form to provide that. So we did that. We also added a section and put forward our argument for why we thought a 440 was appropriate and why this project was in the ordinary course of business and a CCN was not required. So we did that. We sent the 440. This project, as you'll see as we go through the slides, has a cost of approximately $106 million. Under the current 440 rule, any project over $8 million the commissioners have to be notified. So we sent it to all 3 of you and your assistants, and we sent it to staff as we always do. On January 2nd, staff responded consistent with what they had previously indicated, that they were going to recommend a CCN, and Mr. Borman sent a letter. And on January 9th, we filed a response to that letter where we provided our legal support for why we believe a CCN is necessary. And we'll cover that a little bit and why we believe this project's in the ordinary course of business. So that's where we are procedurally today. We're still in the 30-day window under the current 440 rule. We put a starting date of January 22nd. We filed December 22nd. The 30 days that we put in there was consistent. You have 30 days before you start construction when you file a 440. So procedurally, that's where we are. I'll turn it over to Lori to kind of go through this project and go through the next 4 or 5 slides.
okay. All right. Good morning. Very nice to see all of you. So I'll take you through a little bit of the technical detail on the Hidden Mountain substation. And if there's any terminology that's not clear, I'm trying not to use any acronyms because we love our alphabet soup, but if there's anything, make sure to stop me because I do it unintentionally sometimes. So we are seeking to build a greenfield 345 kV, 115 kV substation, so a dual voltage substation. It's going to go in a load area south of Albuquerque. So if you're familiar with the Los Lunas area, it's going to be right a little bit north of Highway 6 on the west side of the freeway, right near the rail yard. Oh, thank you, Mark. Right near the rail yard. It's an area that has quite a bit of economic development interest, and I'll take you through on a later slide kind of the activity that we've been seeing in that area and folks who have been coming to talk to us about expansions there. It's a 3-terminal 345 kV substation. That means there's a spots for 3 different kinds of things to terminate in there, whether it's a transformer, a line, that kind of thing. And it is expandable to an ultimate build out of 8 terminals. That means, and this is really a standard that we're trying to go to in my engineering area, is doing a standard design so that we do a cookie cutter footprint of every substation for the purpose of efficiency, efficiency on maintenance, efficiency on equipment types and ordering and inventory and that kind of thing. So this is following right along with our design standards. The 115 kV side of the substation will be a 3-breaker ring, serving expandable to build out to an additional total of 8 terminals also. Same idea there. There'll be a double circuit high capacity 115 kV line about 2.5 miles between the low side of the Hidden Mountain substation over to the existing Rattlesnake 115 kV substation. I think you all have heard about that before and contemplated that in the prior rate case we just closed. It will include a transformer, so it will be one of our auto transformers, a 450 MVA auto transformer, again, the standard that we use. It's our latest auto transformer, so we have, I'm gonna have to count on BA, to West Mesa, Sandia, not one at Potty to Rio Perco. So we have about 5 existing bulk auto transformers serving the entire central New Mexico load. This would be an additional one to that because the load that will be coming in the Los Lunas area exceeds the transformation capability that we have in and around from all the way down from Rio Rancho, North Albuquerque, all the way down to the Los Lunas area. The additional 345 kV source to the Los Lunas area will increase capacity for capability for generation and loads. So anytime you build a substation, you can connect transformers, you can connect lines, or you can connect generators. There is no distinguishing when we have a bay or a planned bay in a substation. It's capable of taking any one of those kinds of things. So I think at least under my approach to substation design and engineering, we have been very focused on making sure that we don't build a substation that's exactly what we need at that moment. Because what that results in, and I think we were doing that in the 50s and the 60s, there was not a whole lot of thought to expandability. So what we find ourselves with is having to build more and more substations. And the idea here is if you can make a substation, build it to the size you need. So in terms of breakers and that kind of thing, it will be the proper size, but it will have the ability to be expandable without changing out control enclosure, those kinds of things, getting more land, et cetera, et cetera. So you have that efficiency built into the design. There'll be additional resilience to the area through additional circuits to handle flows during planned and forced contingencies. So in terms of transmission planning, and this is kind of a whole science unto itself, but generally speaking, transmission planning and the NERC requirements that we have to follow, every transmission planner in the entire United States follows the exact same criteria. We follow that criteria. And it basically requires that you be able to serve and not overload, not cause voltage excursions outside of certain parameters, those kinds of things, in the case of any set of contingencies. So when you plan a transmission system, you're not just planning it for what needs to be served right at that moment with all lines in service. You have to build it such that any combination of lines can be out at the same time without causing overloads or anything anywhere else. So I think about the transmission system, probably a good analogy is the highway system. You have freeways, you have state roads, you have dirt roads, you have residential roads. It really is a great analogy to think about. Basically what we're doing here is building an intersection on an existing road. That's what a substation is. It's basically akin to building an intersection. It's a sizable intersection. So it's a, you know, not a 2-lane road, simple intersection, but it'll be a larger one given where it is on the, you know, it's basically like an interstate. Think about the transmission lines as the interstate roads. So load growth in Los Lunas, if you read the paper yesterday, you know, Rio Communities down there is expanding. There was a brand new subdivision announced just yesterday. In the case of Los Lunas right now, over the last about 3 to 4 years, we've had somewhere on the average of 9.5% load growth in Valencia County by itself. That's not the load growth around the full state, but Valencia County seems to be the area where there is a significant amount of growth taking place. And we've had a couple of unit subs, so it's the distribution transformers in the area, have had some of them 60% load growth over that time frame. So that tells me a brand new business, a brand new set of houses have gone in that time frame. That's the only thing that would drive those kind of significant growth. And that is all without Meta included. So that is all non-Meta load that's taking place in the Los Lunas area. It's fully compliant, meeting those TPL1 reliability standard criteria I talked about earlier, and I'm happy to answer questions about that. It's really no different than anybody else does, and we attempt, when we're designing substations and doing transmission plans, to find the most efficient way to serve the needed load, or to make sure we're adhering to the reliability criteria that NERC puts out. It is a modernized and standardized design, again, to increase that resilience and efficiency in meeting future needs. One of the big charges I've had in the group is we have right now 25 combinations of high and low voltage medium power transformers alone. There has not been that standardization over those decades in the 60s, 70s, 80s kind of thing. And we're really trying to make an attempt to ensure we've got super standardized. So if you have, I don't know if you get the ISAC reports, but we have physical attacks on substations all over the country every day. And that worries me a lot. And when you talk about extreme weather or wildfire events, those kinds of things, I want to be able to get in those substations, replace the equipment that's there with the standard, keep a nice spares inventory, and this will fit right into that approach. Generator or load additions would trigger network upgrades. I know in the letter Mr. Borman sent, one of the things they talked about is Western Spirit doesn't have transmission capacity. So the way that this works, the substation itself provides interconnection service. So when I talk about a generator potentially going in there, when I have a generator join the system, for example, I have to do two things. One, I have to create interconnection service. Secondly, I have to create transmission service. This will create the interconnection service exclusively. So I hope that makes sense. All right, so we'll move to the next slide, which is slide number 4. Yep, there we go. Okay, so the project location, as I talked about, is that Highway 6. So we're on the west side of I-25. If you're familiar with the Meta complex, this is further east of that by a couple of miles. It will connect into the Rattlesnake substation. And my apologies, it looks like the text got cut off a little bit in the picture here, but that bottom text is 115 kV transmission lines. So you'll see the double circuit 350 MVA lines going from Rattlesnake to the project location in green. And then you see the connection right underneath the Western Spirit transmission line. So it will bisect that line. It will just come in and out of that substation. Okay, we'll move to the next slide, number 5. So this is the project schedule and the major milestones. We have a really detailed project schedule that's literally a dozen pages of single space, but I tried to pick out the major milestones here just to give you a sense of what's happening over the next year and a half as the substation's constructed. So back in September of 23, we awarded EPC an engineering and procurement and construction contract to a bidder through a competitive bid. So for all of our construction projects, and I think you'll see this on another slide, we do competitively bid all of the major equipment, and we competitively bid the engineering, procurement, and construction. So that has been awarded. We are supposed to break ground at the end of this month. And that is, so January could be the first week of February. 345 kV and 115 kV breakers are being delivered to us in March. And these all say March 1st, December 1st. I could figure out how to get it, just the text. So sorry about that. That's not the exact day, but it will be in each of these months. Substation grading and drainage will be completed in April of this year. The foundations, so there's hundreds of foundations that go into substations. Those foundations, the fencing, etc., will be completed in the timeframe between July 2024 and January of 2025.
Lori, this is all assuming you're able to start. in the
Oh, yes.
440.
Yeah, so I'm going down the current schedule column, and then to the right of that, I've put in there, I've assumed a 15-month time frame for a CCN. I know it could be shorter than that, but I assumed the actual amount of time that it could take to give us a sense of the schedule impact. The control houses will be delivered in August and September of 2024. So for anyone that's not familiar, that means the giant kind of steel houses that live in substations and are the climate controlled locations and physical access controlled locations for all the microelectronics in substations, the cybersecurity and whatnot. The reactor will be delivered in September. The auto transformer, which is the 450 MVA auto transformer, gets delivered in December of this year. And I think Mr. Borman made a comment about this. So when we get transformers delivered, there is a requirement that you fill them with oil and you energize them within 90 days of receipt. So you will void the warranty of your transformer because transformers have paper on the inside of them. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but they have paper around the windings. It's one of the insulators. So you have to keep moisture out and you have to keep that paper from getting any other kinds of contaminants. You also have to, it has to be in a vacuum environment. So any tiny piece of particulate, for example, could cause an internal fault to one of those types of equipment. So it's very, very important to keep that space preserved and clean, so to speak. So we have 90 days with those warranties to get that transformer energized and filled with oil. To move it, you again pull vacuum on it, take the oil out. You'll have to process the oil to ensure any moisture that may have entered as you were pulling the vacuum is taken out, because that really is detrimental to the lifespan and of that kind of equipment. The 115 kV line construction would commence in January and may bleed into February. The series compensation would commence in February of 2025. The 115 kV line construction would be completed in June, and we'd expect to switch the substation into service in June of 2025. The customer loads are expected to exceed the current capabilities. So they're on a path where they are adding additional servers and buildings to their location. On a monthly basis, you see a couple of megawatts of load growth each and every month, and that continues for the next couple of years. They will hit the point where they exceed the existing transformation capacity of our central New Mexico, as well as the line capacity during contingencies in July of 2026 is their current plan. Okay. All right, so the cost breakdown, I've given it in both just straight dollars as well as on a percentage basis, so you could get a sense of what goes into a substation. Many people use the word substation kind of interchangeably. Substation can mean a tiny little unit sub to serve a neighborhood. It can also mean a switching station or the big intersections on the superhighways and everything in between. So I think it may be leading to confusion when folks think about substation being, well, it's that little thing down the street. Why is it $105 million? So they can vary in terms of size and purpose and the types of equipment that go into them. So the Los Lunas expansion, the bulk of the costs is going into materials, labor, and that is something that we have seen a tremendous, both on materials, equipment, and the labor side, significant increases in those costs. I think I included that in the presentation I gave to the staff, but we did not include it in here. But I think looking at the 440, I just pulled a table I had included in the 440 rulemaking back about a year ago to give a sense of what cost increases look like. And in terms of transformers, for example, we've seen somewhere on the order, depending on the voltage class, anywhere between a 62% cost increase year over year, all the way up to a 222% increase. And that's since the last time we bought a major auto transformer in 2017. So conduit's gone up about 450%. Breakers have gone up between 60 and 90%. So we've seen just between the global demand, we're at a point where everyone is moving toward the decarbonization, which requires, at least for us, we've built half a dozen substations in the last 2-3 years to accommodate renewable energy interconnections for solar, battery, that kind of thing, wind. And that is something that is happening in every service territory. So you see a massive spike in demand on the market for these kinds of pieces of equipment. You also see across the country, most of our utility systems were built largely in the 50s and the 60s. So we're at the point in time where most folks are having to completely wholesale rebuild transmission lines, rebuild substations, change out breakers. We have breakers on our system that are 70 years old. So we are going through that process of life cycle change out, but that's not just us. That is the United States as a whole, is generally in that same boat. So you have the decarbonization hitting at the same time you have kind of this point in history where the US grid is kind of hitting its turnover point in terms of equipment and that kind of thing. Again, I'll reiterate that all of our capital construction projects and major equipment are all competitively bid. In this case, we had quite a few bidders. I think we were 6 bidders, 6 separate companies bid into this. So we had a nice grouping of costs to sort of compare to one another and ensure we were picking something that was competitively costed. Okay, so moving to the economic development summary in Valencia County, I've put in here a little table, and you didn't know you were going to get a free eye test today, so you're welcome. Yeah, it is quite an eye test. I'm even having trouble reading it myself. So in terms of the table on the left, you'll see all of the sites that we've been formally approached about for economic development projects. I've listed there the type of load, their kind of code name. We never know who these counterparts are. They come to us in a shielded manner. They have a code name. So as their site selectors, and the economic development department shields that so it doesn't get out into the public, but you'll see their code name there, the site that they've evaluated, and you'll see quite a bit of it is right in this area. Proximity to that railroad has been really attractive to a lot of industrial customers. The load type, there's manufacturing, there's data centers, and of all different varieties. The associated load size, and then we've included the number of jobs that are going with each of those. And that's one of the reasons I took my job. I'm really excited about trying to grow New Mexico, trying to be somebody who helps us continue to develop and become a better state. I've raised my family here, and it's something that's really important to me. On the right-hand side, you'll see the load growth. So I've summarized the average load growth in the area, again, non-meta. So that's the Belen Los Lunas. And we're really seeing most of our load growth concentrated in that area and sort of the North Rio Rancho area. Those are probably the 2 biggest areas that we're getting the requests, subdivisions, businesses, those kinds of things trying to come in. In terms of economic development growth, this adds up to about 1,300 megawatts of economic development growth, not including Meta. That's shown interest and gone through a formal process with us since 2021. We've created additional infrastructure in Mesa del Sol for economic development growth. So we do see quite a bit of interest in Mesa del Sol, although it's a little bit more land limited than the Rio Rancho and the Los Lunas areas have been. And then generator interconnects. If you're familiar with the large generator interconnection process, that's a FERC governed process. There are about 3,000 megawatts sitting in that queue right now for study, or has been studied to interconnect in this direct area. So that's been part of our interconnection queue. And again, I'll reiterate that interconnection service, when it comes to FERC, their requirements distinguish between interconnection service and transmission service. So we evaluate both. All right, Stacy, I'll hand it over. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. Stacy Goodwin here. I think staff's reference to the need for a CCN seemed to be in part questions about is there really load there, but also about the cost of the project. As Lori said, you know, our costs have gone up significantly in the last several years. So each substation is significantly more expensive than the last one. And you can see that in our filings. If you look back at some of the 440 filings for substations, one of the things about that, you will also see that we've built 2 or 3 similar scope and size substations using the 440 filing process, informational filing process, where it didn't trigger a concern for from staff in terms of need for a CCN. So while many of the substations, as Lori talked about, are a smaller size than this, solely at the 115 kV voltage, we have built 2 or 3 other ones in the last few years, I think, and Lori can tell you which ones those are, that are this combination 345, 115. As Lori says, this is growth in our area that we already serve. We have a requirement to provide this service that meeting service expansions within your service area under the CCN statute is an ordinary course of business, which provides the exemption from the requirement for getting a CCN. This, for us, for the scale of growth, the need to have standardized types of facilities means that this really to us appears to fall within ordinary course of business. So that's been the position that PNM is taking in this instance. Staff noted that several years ago there was a Rio Puerto substation construction that provided both 345, 115 substation capacity. It interconnected 2 separate 345 transmission lines. So more of that superhighway interconnection rather than a smaller sort of intersection that exists for this project. That was one, again, where PNM didn't believe they needed a CCN. They filed a 440. They went along with staff's request to file one in that case. We think that because we've had other substations similar to this that we've built without a CCN, we foresee in the future that many of the substations that we will be adding in the next several years to meet load growth and interconnections within our service area will be of a similar nature, that it's important for us to know whether this is in fact in the ordinary course of business or it's getting treated to a different standard, because that will make a significant difference in terms of our ability to stay in step with the customer growth so that we don't have lags in terms of providing service. As they're growing, we're growing too. And it's just, we felt that in this instance, rather than just, making a filing that we didn't agree with, we wanted to be clear that we think this is ordinary course of business. So with that, we will all stand for questions, or we can wait till you've heard from staff.
I have a question, but question for hear from staff or hear from staff.
I think that would be better to have questions now, because some of them are just maybe like factual or.
I guess just going through the presentation first, I appreciate you're here, and Ms. Goodwin, I like how you framed that. What are we doing here is for me going forward, it's kind of, we need to make sure everybody's on the same page of how these pieces fit together. Having said that, I got some questions about the presentation and how P&M is defining ordinary course of business. So I guess I'll start with slide 5. I mean, you got a schedule there that to me is just what's the schedule sitting here today. But what is the planning and all the work and thinking and identification? When did all that start within P&M before the RFP went out?
So in 2018, I'm told, I was not in the group at that point in time, but in 2018, Meta started talking about their load going to these levels. So studies to define what a optimal solution would be were looked at. There were a variety of options looked at, and this was arrived at as the least cost, the least amount of construction, and the potential for a lot of permitting issues or trying to build transmission lines through areas that probably wouldn't welcome a transmission line, that kind of thing. So
Yeah, I guess where I'm getting at that is if P&M had met with staff a year ago
yeah,
and filed a CCN a year ago, we wouldn't be in this spot, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So was this decision that to make the filing you're comfortable with happen recently, or did it happen a year ago?
What was the question?
Well, I mean, Ms. Goodwin said that they chose to go the 440 route based on, I mean, I understand why you did it after the presentation, but framed it as we wanted to, rather than listen to staff and file a CCN now, we want to make the filing that we're comfortable with. So was that even a question a year ago, which is the right filing to make?
I'll just speak from a regulatory perspective. We didn't see the draft 440 filing till the November timeframe. So I didn't see it a year ago, and there wasn't this contemplating that we're ready to make a filing, whether it's a 440 or a CCN filing. But I think, I mean, that's all I'd say about it is I just became aware that we needed to make a filing in the November timeframe, October-November timeframe.
Yeah, I appreciate that because, I mean, one of my goals today is just get at process. I mean, in the, how do we move forward? I think we all, not just with utilities, and this is bigger than just P&M, is work through the steps of the process that got us to here. So anyway, that's why I was asking that question. And then it also underlied just a little frustration that we frequently get stuff from utilities that are approved this or else. And this slide is that. So
I will note that this is, as Lori had said, you know, there's been a long series of planning over the years for growth in the sort of larger metropolitan area. And I think certainly the engineering group has viewed this as one of a series. Sky Ranch was the one that came before this. There was another one that
Yeah.
preceded that. And so to the extent that this seemed to be going in line with the other projects that have come before, it really did not appear like this was the time in last summer or last year to go, oh, let me just, you know, see if I have a filing requirement that didn't, you know, in terms of getting a regulatory approval. It wasn't appearing to the engineering group that this was outside of the ordinary course of what they had been doing.
So yeah, that's, thank you, reminded me, we have the list of the 3 similar substations that used a 440 recently?
So in the last couple of years, I'll tell you, we've built I'm gonna make a list of the Arroyo substation. And that was a 440, that's a 345 kV substation. We are in the process of constructing the San Juan North substation, which is an interconnection LGIA substation for the San Juan Solar, also 345. We're in the process of constructing the Atrisco 345 kV interconnection, which will be called the Quail Ranch substation. That's also currently going on. Prior to those, we built the Pajarito 345 kV substation. I know I'm leaving some out. Sky Ranch is a 115 kV substation. Pajarito was 345. So that's, in all those cases, we were filed 440s. So at least from my perspective, when I read the CCN language, I did not see anything that said to me this was somehow different than these others. So from my perspective, at least the language may not be interpreted the same way by everyone. I think there may be some unwritten rules in there potentially that people are abiding by, but I think when I read it on its face, I didn't see it as clearly requiring a CCN or even hinting at requiring a CCN.
So did you give staff that list in the conversations in December?
No.
When we had the conversation in December, there wasn't any questions that came up during that conversation about whether or not a CCN was required. We talked about it briefly.
Okay. And then, this has been an excellent exercise for me because it caused me to work through CCN 440. I also went to PUA to try to help me think through this. And so just why does regulation exist? And, why does CCN exist? It's to make sure that utilities can serve load, be ready to grow with the growth. But the other side of it is don't do it in a expensive, unnecessary way. And so that's why cost is an issue here. And ordinary course of business, I wonder about whether it's even possible to set a dollar number, because I acknowledge things have gotten more expensive recently. So then it was more, all right, what about behavior as ordinary course of business? So was looking at PNM's EEI investor presentation that you made in November, right? And that, if I'm reading that correctly, if I can find the slide. Yeah, we're advertising for investors a PNM investment plan. There was an order of 400, 500 million a year. So then when I look at this, that's 20% of that.
Yep.
And then when I look at also in this investor presentation, there's a list of important cases in front of the PRC. So would spending 100 million a year get itself on that list of important cases that get communicated to investors?
I think not necessarily. There's a couple of things, and we actually very much appreciate that you put this on an agenda to have this discussion, because we do think it's reflective of some things that have been changing over the years gradually. And one of the things, when we look at the Rule 440 purpose of it's an informational filing, it to me is similar to also what we do with regard to financing file. We have an annual forward-looking financing report that we file each year. And a lot of this is about making sure that the commission knows activities that are going on that will show up in a rate case, for example. So, having a minimum amount of projects, staff can see these are the kinds of things that when we do get to the next rate case, that they will be reviewing. Did you tell us that you were making these investments, that you were planning to, ask for approval of cost recovery in a rate case? And so that, the rate cases where are these the reasonable dollars, that review occurs. I know that when we did the rulemaking recently that updated the 440 rule, the issue of should there be a cost cap as a trigger, to say that this is outside the ordinary course of business, it was at least an inquiry of the commission. It appears that it didn't really you know, they struggle with this cost increase. Do you just set an arbitrary cap and then suddenly it's not the right one? You have to do another rulemaking. So I do think this is something that the commission has looked at over the years. I don't know that they've ever come up with here are the bright lines that would be helpful for everybody.
Well, yeah, I guess that's the nut of my question is if the 440 is a vehicle to inform the commission of investments for future rate cases. Why is informing the commission a different dynamic than informing investors or customers? I mean, what I'm hearing is 100 million isn't worth telling the commission, but it is clearly something that you'll tell investors because.
Well, certainly it's worth telling the commission. I mean, anything over the minimum amounts are worth telling the commission. And so if you mean telling the commission formally through an application because an application is required by statute, you know, the cases that may get listed in an investor relation communication are about communicating to investors. These are the things that are currently in front of the regulator in a formal process. So we don't tell investors the myriad of compliance filings we make for a variety of purposes, whether they're backward looking or forward looking. So I think that you communicate different types of information to different groups because that's what they're interested in. To the extent the commission has said, we want informational filings through the 440 process. That amount has a minimum. It doesn't have a maximum. So there is a minimum for the filing. There's a higher minimum threshold for a direct communication to each commissioner, for example. So it's again, puts everybody in a place of sometimes what it comes down to is what is your assessment of ordinary course of business? We made an assessment in this case that this was similar to things we have been doing. So it's to serve a rapidly growing area of our service area where we are required to provide service to all of the businesses, all of the residents who come in, no matter what size they may be, cumulatively or individually. And so that for our purposes seems like the ordinary course of business.
Yeah, and what I'm exploring here is it feels like based on investor presentation at $100 million, there's a convergence of interests between the regulator, the investor, and the customer. And so, you know, you're saying different vehicles for what are different people interested in. Well, again, go back and read the PUA. It kind of feels like we should be interested in such a large amount of money being spent in a way that's going to flow through to customer bills. And then just as a data point, I don't think you issue press releases for things that are normal or ordinary course of business, but I saw a press release for the decision on the battery, and that's what, $25 million. So somewhere between 0, 25 million, 100 million, just the amount of money that's getting spent isn't ordinary.
And again, one of the issues with regard to that and we certainly are not trying to say 100 million is not you know, insignificant. What we have been seeing, as Lori says, is year over year, what might have cost 60 million a few years ago is over 100 million now, or even it
Yeah,
might have
and
been
do you
40.
think that's a
So
piece of information that the commission should be interested in?
I think you should be interested in that, and I think it's an important part of how.
Then this is really about what's the communication vehicle.
Right.
CCN gives you the communication vehicle to make that communication. So why was the choice not to use the more robust communication?
I think the choice was that a CCN, if you're acting in the ordinary course of business and and what you are seeing in your business is an increase, you have an avenue to inform the commission through informational filings that say,
Well, and
here are
at
the costs of project.
that point, I mean,
Yeah, so that's,
Mr. Fenton was saying he couldn't even fill out the 444, but didn't have enough lines in it to give the information that was needed for the 440 filing, so just form following function there.
and again,
I mean, how's
The
it
com-
ordinary if you can't even fill out the form?
I don't know how to comment on the decision the commission made to go to a more
This isn't the
truncated
commission
form.
decision we're talking about here. The decision is P and M's decision whether to file a 440 or a CCN.
Yes, and we made a decision that was in line with previous decisions we've made that were not challenged by staff.
And we did try to expand, I did make the comment on the forum that we did recognize partially due to the cost, we knew it would be of interest to the commission. And that's part of the reason we filed a more robust 440 than the form allowed. We provided more explanation in this 440 than recent 440.
441?
It was 440. It was a more robust 440.
All right, I mean, those are my big questions. Do you have any questions?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I would like to focus in more on the other substations that were built. In the 440 was it sort of using your analogy in terms of the intersection. How do the ones that you mentioned, Arroyo, San Juan, Atrisco, Pajarito, how do those compare to this one? Ignoring costs, because we know, you've explained that costs have gone up, but just in terms of size and function, and the needs that are being addressed.
Okay, sure, happy to. So the first grouping of them, the Arroyo, the San Juan, the Atrisco, and the Pajarito are all identical to Hidden Mountain's 345 kV layout. So it's again using our standard layout. Each of those is connected to an existing 345 kV location. So Arroyo, I think that was one people are probably the most familiar with. That's been in service for about 1.5 years. That is the same thing, the control enclosure, the layout that can be expanded. And what else to talk about it? It's bisects an existing 345 kV line. In that case, it's interconnecting a generator. In the case of each of those are connecting a new renewable generator. In the case of Hidden Mountain, no generator is going in there, but it's connecting a transformer. That transformer is connecting it to the Hidden Mountain, the 115 kV side of the Hidden Mountain substation. Sky Ranch is another 115 kV substation that we've also built, again, connecting solar and battery energy storage. Same exact thing, designed for expandability, but only built to what's needed to make those interconnections. All of them have to have, every single substation has to have common elements, has to have a grounding grid. It has to have layout, grading and drainage. Everything has to be on a foundation. All of those foundations are dug underground to ensure you have solid bases for every bit of the substation equipment that's in there. There's really no difference in those designs. We've gone through a pretty exhaustive process developing standard designs for all of our 115 kV, 345 kV, 230. Name something, it's got a standard design, poles, lines, all of that kind of stuff. This has the control enclosure, it has the same cybersecurity requirements, it has the same physical security requirements, relaying, communications, fiber communications to every one of our substations. We have 2 forms of communication so that if you have a communications dropout that you can continue its safe operation. So I'm struggling to think of a big difference other than the transformer. And in the case of the generator connections, they all have transformers to their, they don't take service for the generators at the 345. So they've put in transformers to step down to their inverters.
Okay, thank you. And so in these other cases that you explained, there is a generator requesting to interconnect. Here, it's not a generator, but it's load and
Load, yeah.
various customers. can you explain? There was a point where you explained something about, that you were formally approached, but
Yep.
then I also see, that there are, some resources trying to interconnect in the area.
Yes.
So can you, I'm trying to assess what you are reacting to. Are these formal interconnection requests? You know, what is formally approached?
Yeah, so depending on the side, so for loads don't have to go through the FERC interconnection process. So they're not doing that, but they're coming to us through New Mexico area and the state government economic development departments or the county economic development departments. They come to us with proposals that say, I would like to build this manufacturing facility with this load factor, this size, this ramp up schedule. We go through the whole thing, the service voltage level that they're looking to be served. Any other technical characteristics, if there's motor loads or those kinds of things, are obviously very important for us to understand. So we go through a process and they look for, can you do a design for me, a preliminary design? Give me a sense of what the schedule and the cost would look like, what kinds of service I could expect. We give them data about service continuity or service quality and reliability, that kind of stuff. And we generally exchange a package that says, here's what we could do for you. If you come to this area, this is what it would take to get you up and running. So these are all of the people who have gone through that formal process with us on the load side. On the generator side, it's governed by the FERC generator interconnection process. Very similar, but the timeframes and the entire process is very, very defined, as I'm sure you're very familiar with. But that we go through the same kind of thing. We have to do studies to determine what it's going to take to interconnect them. So when I think about a substation, to me, it's all the same. I'm either serving a load or I'm interconnecting a generator. It's the same exact thing that's occurring with that substation. And this substation can do either, right? So it can connect to other lines. It can connect generators if they're in the area and are seeking interconnection service, and it can connect loads. So you have that opportunity, same thing, transformers. So you're really building bays or opportunities for someone to hook into the grid. That's what the substation is doing.
Okay, and so with respect to the generator, what phase are they in your DICES, you know, is
So
it like a system
these are
impact
all in
study?
different, so the way that we do our generator interconnection queue, it's by clusters. So we do cluster studies. So these are across various clusters. So some of them have signed LGIAs. Some of them are in either the system impact study or facility study part of the process. Some of them are getting tendered draft LGIAs, and some are in the queue awaiting their study to start. So we have, that's our queue, as I call it.
Okay, and then the ones that have signed the LGIAs, are they suspended or are they?
No, so we didn't start suspending LGIAs. If they don't give notice to proceed in about the last year or so, we've started immediately suspending. If you don't provide notice to proceed in the financial security, your LGIA is suspended. But suspended doesn't mean anything other than you can come forward. We just put you on a time clock. We're trying to have more of a time clock because our queue right now has over 30,000 megawatts trying to interconnect to a 2,000 megawatt system. So we are trying to find a time clock for those LGIA interconnections to not just squat in perpetuity, because that creates a lot of design considerations going forward. You have to count on those projects being connected to the grid when you plan for the things that come in the queue after it, even if it never materializes. That's the FERC process. So for us, we're really trying to cut down on the number of people that squat in the queue. So we've gone to that suspension, but some of them are not suspended because that wasn't the FERC approved practice at the time. So some of them are just squatting with an LGIA.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And so what I guess I'm trying to get to sort of the certainty that you have, you know, that makes you decide that we need to build this substation, right? Because you're reacting to something. And so I'm trying to determine, is it like with these other substations where you had a request and you had to build it? It sounds to, and then on the other hand, staff was sort of questioning whether any of this will actually materialize.
None of this is needed for the substation. So the substation is needed for Meta to get served pursuant to the NERC TPL1 planning criteria. So when we have contingencies to maintain flows on the system within the limits of our lines and that kind of thing, and for us to maintain the voltages, you cannot serve more than 275 megawatts in that area without adding additional source to the area to stabilize that. So that means you've added an intersection. So when you have a congestion or an overload on a particular area, you now have another path to get out or get in, right? That's what this intersection is going to provide for us. So we cannot, it is not, the reason I brought this up is to highlight that there is a lot of growth in this area, and I am going to have to serve this. What I'm trying to do with my substation design is not build exactly what I need everywhere I go. But in the case, the only thing that's getting, I would say, overbuilt in this substation instance, but it's the same as all those other substations we've built. We've built them so that they can be expandable. They are not bigger than they need to be, just the footprint of the grounding grid and the size of the control enclosure for the microelectronics that would come along with its ultimate build out are there. So today, when the way the system was built back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, when I go to replace a relay, so I have electromechanical relays, when I go to replace them with a microprocessor relay, I have to change out the control enclosure, which is silly. Right? I should be able to put better technology out there, but I can't do it because the control enclosures were sized for exactly the components that were getting put in it in the 1960s. Right? So that's the kind of thing I've been up against in terms of our substations. So that's really the only thing that's happening here that I would say is out of what's needed. But because of these other things, I'm not going to have to build yet another 345 kV substation to handle all this. I can expand.
Yeah.
Right. I'm creating that Lego capability there.
Yeah. Can I just clarify one thing?
Sure.
I may have gotten confused. In order to accommodate all of these customers that have formally approached you, do you need the substation?
Oh, yes, we would
Yes,
need the
okay.
substation.
That's what,
Yeah.
that's what I thought. And then
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure I didn't misunderstand something. Okay, and
But
so.
it may not, I'll clarify, it may not be the only thing we need. So I think Mr. Borman's letter talked about Western Spirit transmission capacity. Again, interconnection service is one side of the thing I have to work on. The other is the transmission service. So if some of these come, there may be the need to do additional transmission service, but I'll have the spots to land those without starting from scratch again.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And now sort of looping back to where we started was, I was asking about, well, what about these other substations? Are they the same or are they different? You're making the case that they're the same or very similar, right? For purposes of why we're here, you filed 440 for those, and staff didn't raise the same issue in those other cases. I am more sympathetic to the decision because I don't think it's clear. I appreciate that, Ms. Goodwin, you mentioned that you want certainty. I think that's an excellent idea. There's no cost cap. At the same time, I don't think this necessarily says that if CCN doesn't have to be filed, but there is sort of a historical practice that you have been following here. And so I understand why you made the decision to file a 440 30 days before you plan to begin construction, because that is what 440 is asking for. So I'll, sort of not, I don't want to, make a call on whether a 440 or a CCN is required in this case. I'm just saying that I understand, why a 440, why that approach was taken here. I have other questions on kind of as I was going through the presentation. I don't know if Commissioner Ellison wanted to, stay on this topic about the other substations. Yes. Your mic.
I mean, yeah, I've got multiple questions, so, I mean, whatever you think, whatever you'd like to do, if you'd like to ask some clarifications, but I've got multiple questions of my own.
I'll just ask, I think maybe a flavor of this was already asked, but you have this load that you're expecting. What other options do you have to accommodate it?
So in terms of transformation, you have to have another auto transformer. So as I mentioned, those existing transformers around the entire load center from northern Rio Rancho all the way down to Berlin, we have a set of transformers that's capacity will be exceeded once the load for this exceeds 275 in this area. So that is a requirement no matter what. We have locations we could have put that otherwise. We could have put that at the Pajarito substation. The difficulty with that was if we put it up there, we had to build multiple 115 kV lines down to the area, and those are 20, 30 miles a piece. The cost of those was going to exceed the cost here, that if we could bisect a 345 coming very near the area, you get a lot more bang for the buck than you do if you're trying to build greenfield transmission and multiple transmission lines to get down to that area. The transformer could have gone in Pajarito, but for those 115 kV transmission, that was part of the problem. In terms of where you serve the load, so feeder lengths matter. When you get down to lower voltages, you get significant voltage drop over very short distances. So you really want to have your substations close to the load to minimize the amount of voltage drop, because you, again, put in things like voltage regulators and you are required to put in a lot more stuff to try to prop it up to get it there. So in terms of proximity, this gave you the best way to serve the load without a bunch of transmission construction, and doing it in a way that's very near the load. So you are also minimizing the amount of distribution enhancement that would have to take place. So that was really a decision to try to capitalize on a 345 that would be very near the load without building, 4 new sub-transmission lines. Transmission nowadays is somewhere between $3.5 and $5 million a mile for the 345, and we're right around $2 million a mile for the 115 kV. So that really would have, you still have to have the transformer, and then you would have had to have somewhere to put all of those lines and try to get it in close. So that was part of the decision making. We can't get the transformer in West Mesa. So you've got Pajarito and West Mesa are probably the two closest existing 345 kV stations. West Mesa cannot take another element. It is completely built out and it's landlocked with residential and other things. So you can't expand the footprint of that in any way. And that would have driven the same number of transmission line construction, but a little bit longer distance than you have here. So part of what, and I hope you guys will see this at the end of the year, we're in the process of doing a 20-year transmission plan. To give insight into what the next 2 decades look like in terms of trying to build out the system. And we really are trying to, with the growth from Rio Rancho all the way down through Berlin, that corridor kind of along the western side of the city and down into the load area is where the next set of transmission lines, substations, all that kind of stuff will end up going to try to support the load. Sandia is kind of land. I guess I won't get into it all. I love to talk about it, so I could bore you all day. But anyway, those were the alternatives.
Okay. What is the length of this double circuit line?
2.5 miles.
Okay. When did you order the transformer?
In, I think it was October or November of 2022. When we got notice to proceed from Meta, we put the order in, we did a competitive bid and then put the order in for the transformer because transformers are now exceeding about a 3-year lead time. So the lead time on the equipment, at least the transformer itself, is a critical path.
Okay, thank you. I do have other questions, but I don't want to dominate this, so I'm gonna pass it over to Commissioner Ellison. Maybe he has the same. Maybe his questions will answer mine.
Sure, appreciate your coming in today. It's already been very insightful. Have learned a lot. You mentioned some of these other substations with 345 kV transformers, Arroyo, San Juan North, Atrisco, Pajarito, were I guess, so these were 440 forms submitted on all of these projects?
Yes.
Was there also a PPA approval process for the solar facilities that would interconnect into these substations?
I believe so, yes.
And so the commission was not relying on for review solely the documentation provided in the 440 process. Isn't that correct? That there would have been a lot more information about these power plants and the need for the substations.
Yeah, so when we filed for the PPAs, yeah, you get quite a bit of information about that. Not a whole lot about the transmission, but the fact that there'll be an interconnection built and kind of the litany of things that go into that. But I think there's not a whole lot more explanation than that.
And so I guess that seems to me to be one distinction here between
Yes,
the substation that we're talking about today, the Hidden Mountain, versus these substations. There was an associated review process that went far beyond the 440 informational filing with these.
I don't think there was, maybe all.
yeah, Pajarito is not a generator interconnect, but it was at the tail end of the Western Spirit transmission line. So I'm actually not familiar with what process Pajarito went through myself. But in terms of San Juan North, yes, there's a PPA connected there, Atrisco PPA connected, and Sky Ranch PPA connected. And there's no PPA here, so there's not really a reason to file that information.
Right. But I guess my point is that for these, with maybe the exception of Pajarito, that there was an associated filing where the commission had the opportunity to review aspects of the project prior to your actually constructing them.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, yes. But the requirement for us to construct stations when it's a generator interconnect, we have to build it no matter what. It is a FERC requirement. So we are under FERC's jurisdiction.
Right.
And in accordance with our oath, even if a PPA is not approved, 440, I'm still obligated to build that interconnection if that interconnector has followed that process. So there's.
But in these
slightly different on the transmission side.
in these cases, Arroyo, San Juan, Atrisco, did you wait for PPA approval prior to beginning construction on those substations?
In most cases, yes. Well, in all cases, yes. We did enter into engineering and procurement agreements to try to keep those on schedule. So the interconnector paid for engineering and procurement out of their own pocket at risk, so that we could keep schedules. But yes, in terms of an actual shovel in the ground, that did not occur until there was approvals.
Right, right.
Well, not approvals. If it was an informational filing, the 30 days being elapsed.
And you mentioned that there are 5 large auto transformers serving your central New Mexico load currently, and this, were it to go into service, would be number 6. Would you not see, adding a 6th major transformer like this to be something out of the ordinary?
For me, no. Transformers are part of almost every design I do. I don't think about an auto transformer any differently than I do a medium power transformer. We're doing a phase shifting transformer right now. We'll go in at the Berlin substation that is under construction. That is a fairly large transformer. So those kinds of things to me are in the normal course of business because that's what we do day in and day out all over the system. But, I hear your concern, and obviously Commissioner O'Connell and Aguilera, I see that we have a difference of opinion about normal course of business, and I accept that. I think the CCN rule to me is not in the 440 rule. To me, as I read them, didn't say I needed to do a CCN. I certainly, think that's something that we could look at making more clear, although it's Stacy and others have talked about it, is hard to build a bright line there, but there's got to be a way, I think, to make it more clear that all of us come to the same conclusions, on a regular basis.
Can I just add one thing about, there being PPAs for some of these other projects. The substations weren't necessarily part of that process. They were, sort of we will also be doing these other things. Certainly in the Los Lunas area, as Lori has pointed out, there's on the economic development summary table, it does show the meta as well as all these additional projects. Certainly the notion that the Meta data center, along with other things, are growing there has been in front of the commission in different forms, some through 440 filings, but also through PPAs for service under their rate schedules for them as well. So I do think that the knowledge that this is an area where more than 200 and what did you say? 275 megawatts will be known to be needed in this area has been shown in different cases before the commission. So I didn't want to just make it seem like this one was out of the ordinary because there weren't other surrounding cases as well. It's not to say that's not an issue. It's just, it is information that has come up, I think.
Thank you. Wouldn't it be reasonable to anticipate that the commission might have a concern with and might want to review $100 million project? Is that something that was ever discussed?
It's interesting when we had a rulemaking where you have minimum thresholds, but the discussion about, do you set a cap that says this is the amount? I think that probably when this was originally looked at in part of a larger planning prospect starting in 2018 or whenever it was, or 2020 when you ordered things. I would expect that this price has changed over time. So it's hard to say when you initiate, when you are in early stages of planning, it may be the project costs can have a pretty broad range of,
Yeah, the pandemic didn't help. Yeah, the pandemic definitely didn't help, but
so I don't, I don't want to say that, again, we're not trying to minimize the cost here as these aren't important dollars.
Certainly, Commissioner Wilson, we did realize that the cost of this project of $6 million would get some additional scrutiny. And that's the one thing we needed to file it with the commission. It was over the $8 million threshold. But that was one of the reasons. We don't meet with staff on every single 40. We met with staff in advance on this one because we did expect it to, to get a little more scrutiny. That's also a reason, as I said earlier, opening remarks, one of the reasons we made a more robust 440 than is even allowed in the form, or that fits in the form. To further explain it, because we knew the commission probably at $106 million expenditure would scrutinize it. So.
And I think it's just as a matter of says.
Just as a matter of process, I understood that you met with staff on December 5th, is that right? And you may not have realized that that staff did not communicate with the commission that meeting had been held or the contents of that meeting. So it was really only on December 22nd when you filed the 440 that we first saw, and that was the Friday before Christmas, which wasn't great timing for the holidays or for those of us focusing on your big rate case.
I understand that. I should say at the outset, we do appreciate you having this meeting today, right? This issue. You're doing it very good. I certainly appreciate it.
But I'm not sure what the best process is going forward, but personally, I would like to hear from you much sooner on cases like this, and I'm always open to having an open meeting like this, but not a couple of weeks before you're going to start construction, but much earlier. And partially maybe we need to talk about our commission ex parte rules that I think were the cause of staff not communicating with the commission on this particular issue about that meeting, that our ex parte rules are more strict than the law requires. So that's one issue, but I think just having knowledge of your plans, much earlier would make a big difference. You mentioned that you're working on a 20-year transmission plan. Is that something that you could share with us when complete?
absolutely. That is our plan to make it public, not just for you guys, but any developers, folks out there working on subdivisions, any of that kind of thing. It's going to, just to give you a little bit of a preview, it's breaking the state into 4 sort of zones, I'm going to call it. And we've based those on largely transmission constraints. So for example, one zone is the entire eastern part of New Mexico from Klein's Corners over. We have a lot of interest in getting transmission in and out of there. So we're in the 20-year plan, we're taking each of those zones and we're building solutions that will serve load in those areas and increase export capability out of those areas and then make that public in the hopes that it helps move the whole conversation forward about decarbonization as well as load growth, economic development, that kind of thing. So my real hope is it makes this much more transparent. I can't normally share transmission information, non-public transmission information with people unless I put it on Oasis or I give access to everybody at the same exact time. It's part of the FERC obligations. So my thought was give it to everybody that may have an interest, and we sort of cover that off while hopefully forwarding the conversation about the long term.
One of the things, Commissioner Ellison, we intend to do this year is try to get on the open meeting agenda, or possibly through workshops or whatever is appropriate. Something like this 20-year transmission plan. Once it's published, we would like to present it to the commission. Whether, I don't know, need to work with the commission on what's the appropriate one, whether it's at an open meeting, everybody, or whether it's at a workshop or some other forum. But we certainly, there's topics coming up that like we appreciate how open you are to them. So that would be our intention.
Would this facility, if built, be considered a transmission asset?
Yes, it will be.
And would you classify it as a system asset?
Yes, yep, just like, kind of using that superhighway analogy. Every electron will flow through this at one point or another, depending on the configuration of the system or what's going on, so.
And so we haven't talked about rates, but if it were to be classified as a system asset, that would mean that there would be this split between what FERC customers would pay and what the rest of the retail customers.
That's correct. That's correct. And I understand there'd be a split that a load customer would pay a portion of this as well, independent of those things. So you would take some piece of that off, and I'm not the rates or the cost piece, but giving you a sense of what I know there'll be some element of this that's allocated directly to the customer, and then elements that are in retail rates and elements that are in FERC rates thereafter. So that's kind of how we split, but I'm sure a rates person is better to talk about those things. I'm generally aware of that being the case.
Okay, and this timeline that you've outlined here on slide 5, you've got customer loads expected to exceed existing transmission capability July 1st of 2026. However, it looks like you're not planning for the project to be complete until September the 1st.
If we take 15 months to do a CCN, that would be the case, yes.
So it is a CCN built into this? Oh, I see. You CCN revised schedule. Okay, so you're just flagging that it would be a few months late.
That's correct. And that's if we filed one today. I have not prepared one in the recent past. I don't know how much time it takes for preparation and filing, but I would assume a month or two. And so, but I just tried to give a sense of what customer impact might look like. And any of the dates that are in red are dates that would be affected by a CCN. We have several dates that won't be affected, but for things like reactor and auto transformer delivery, those do require containment and they require oil and energization. So I'll have to figure out where to build a containment and some energization to take that delivery. It will have to be behind a physical security boundary. I can't just plop it down where this project will eventually go because it's grading, has to be done, grounding, all the stuff, all the safety things and warranty things, but I would be able to figure that out if I knew I needed to, but that will be just an additional cost here.
One question that I think is important to make sure Lori, that the commission understands this. Please, this question is not trying to put the commission in the box and trying to put you in the box at all, but I know on the way up here, Lori, you mentioned to me that there would be, whether you go to the CCN or whether you go to 440. There, if the project is delayed for some reason, there are potential implications on the ultimate cost of this project,
Oh, yeah, that's correct.
which is different than the schedule.
Yep.
So I think it's important the commission's aware of that, even if it's a CCN, that, you know, you have the 15-month schedule on here, but CCNs can be done.
Yeah,
What are
and
the implications to cost?
so the implications to cost, we're trying to work out with the EPC vendor right now to understand how their charges may change if we demobilize them and start again. The last one that we did, we halted some relay replacements and control enclosure replacements that resulted in about a 20% cost increase. Albeit a smaller project, but that was about the magnitude. I would expect there to be costs on labor and materials, any materials that have not been procured. That are shorter term. We procured all the long lead time, but normally in an EPC, they procure the additional equipment and materials that are not the major components. Those would go through whatever the time value of money or inflation piece. So there would be a cost impact.
And the customer loads, is that exclusively Meta load?
Yes, so that's when Meta will use up that 275 of capability. It's possible that that could occur before, depending on other business kinds of things. If folks come and want new service delivery, and between now and then, that could move that date up in time. But I don't have certainty around that today, so I can't tell you what that is.
And that sort of reflects some contractual arrangements that have been put in place.
Yeah, so they, Meta normally likes you to be, and anybody, I mean, generators are the same way. We normally have to beat a generator or a load to the time frame that they need, because they typically need backfeed from these facilities to do construction, continued construction in the area, testing and commissioning of their side of all of this equipment or the inverters or what have you. So it's typically between, I'd say, 3 and 6 months that they need the backfeed power to do some of that. So we usually have to beat them to the punch a little bit. But that, you know, sometimes we can work with folks on their side where they move their crews to 7-10 hour days or 6-12s or something like that to compress schedules. So there's a little bit of wiggle room in there, but not usually a ton.
You know, obviously a CCN can be done much sooner than 15 months if, you know, there were the need and the commission were to agree on that. It just kind of feels like you've put us in the situation here where we choose between doing a review of this project or we risk you're not meeting the customer demand.
Yeah, and that was certainly not my intention. I don't think any of our intentions. I think I read the rule as it appeared to me on its in plain language. And so my intention was not to put you in a situation where you feel like you're backed into a corner in any way. That's not what I am looking to do.
I do have one other question. Do you have plans for any other substations currently? Where it seems like we're interested in knowing
Yes.
about them, so.
It's explosive in our territory right now. Yeah, it is explosive in our territory. I will say I've worked at P&M almost 32 years now, and never ever in my career have I seen it like this, even close. It is exploding. I would say the last 3 years, as we came out of the pandemic, you saw just a massive increase in the number of customers trying to interconnect at every possible level. there has been a massive explosion in our large generator and small generator interconnection queue. Prior to community solar, we had a 3,000% increase in small generator interconnection applications year over year. That kind of explosive is what I'm talking about. So we have right now in progress, we have the substation that's being built to serve the airport and the Randolph substation area. So again, that's coming from our closet substation, but really when you drive by them, they are truly the size of a closet. You could not expand them if your life depended on it. So that's trying to eliminate that closet substation and put in a more robust solution for the airport and the surrounding business area. We have a prosperity substation, which serves Mesa del Sol and is part of that master plan. That's under construction right now. Trying to think of where else. They're all over the place.
How about future?
Future, we have unit subs that are required in North Albuquerque Acres, Alamogordo, Ruidoso, Southwest Albuquerque. I know I'm forgetting one. Cindy Buck's gonna kill me. I'm forgetting one of her load area substations, but it is a tremendous amount of construction and growth that's occurring. Really unprecedented, at least in my experience.
Okay, thank you. And, you know, we should expect the same from, you know, SPS obviously it's growing tremendously.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons I thought today was important is this dynamic isn't. But I guess, you know, I'm just speaking for myself here, but memo to PNM, if you think it's important to highlight something to investors and you're gonna issue a press release after the commission approves it, it's important to us.
Okay, I'm gonna have to pay more attention to the investor releases.
Well, I mean, 22 million was enough for that. This is 100, so 5 times more than that. And then the other point is if it's interesting and needs review, half of 30 days is not enough time.
Yeah.
And that's what 440 means. And so I say, go back and reread the PUA and think about what your relationship is between doing the business you need to do and being a regulated utility. I mean, that looks, I appreciate everything I've heard today, but your comments didn't pass the red face test in terms of what is ordinary course of business. That really feels like there's a division, you know, 2 different definitions depending on who you're talking. And it falls down on the amount of money getting spent is really where the rubber meets the road. So anyway, again, this is about moving forward. So I'm giving you real time, honest feedback on what I heard here.
And we definitely appreciate that because we don't want to be in a situation where we feel like we're putting you in a box. That is, as Lori says, that's never our intent. I think.
I wouldn't say we're in a box yet. We're not done with today. We still need
Sure.
to hear from staff. We've still got some
Absolutely.
orders to consider.
And I will say, you know, to the extent dollars don't show up in the statutes or rules in a way that gives us really clear signals. I think if it's helpful going forward, whether you want to consider further amendments to the Rule 440 rule, or if you have some directive to us that as costs increase even if it's a project that Lori builds a lot of substations.
That's why I was trying to
But if
be
it's
objective
$1,
in
right.
my comments here is if you're triggering other things that are unusual within PNM, like this is gonna be a line item on investor presentation. You need to think about what that means for the regulatory. And frankly, it's saying we should revise the rules when you just said, wow, this is urgent and lots of stuff needs to happen, kind of feels like a delay tactic.
I wasn't
or
trying to say,
disincentive.
I really wasn't trying to say that, but what I was trying to communicate was, this is good guidance for us that maybe in instances, as we see a 440 filing that has increased dollars in it, even if there's doesn't seem to be more than a trigger than the 8 million, that we could certainly make an effort to come in sooner than the 30-day requirement in the rule, so that we do have more time for staff to say things, respond to things, have things come before you in a way that can flesh out any of these concerns. So my comment was just meant to be, as we move forward, we will certainly take that into consideration and into account so that we can get you information in a way that feels, even if it's longer than what is in the rule, that just seems to make more sense under a particular circumstance that looks unusual.
I guess my comment is I'm asking you to use better judgment, and that's more immediate and direct than the amount of time it would take to.
Sir,
I wanted to point out, the 440, I think it, in part, it did its job here in alerting us that, there's something big that we need to pay attention to, but it seems like the CCN and the 440 are totally independent. You would still need to do the 440 under the commission rules because of the magnitude of the project, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to consider the CCN or that the project shouldn't go through the CCN route. And it just seems to me that a 345 kV project, it's just hard for me to picture that as being sort of an ordinary event. So that's, I guess, one thing that jumps out at me.
okay.
Okay, so we're horrifically running past time, and appreciate the patience of staff who sat here through this. We were scheduled, this meeting is scheduled through 1. I still want to hear from staff. So I guess my question is how to proceed. It feels like there's a sense of urgency because of the calendar issues that Commissioner Ellis so eloquently marked us through the Friday before Christmas filing started at o'clock. So is it okay? Are you available, staff, to stick around for a little longer? Okay. And are you available? Sure.
Could I say, Jeff?
Yeah, I was gonna say, let's do a 10-minute break.
15, come back up.
15, all right,
Thank you
we'll
very much.
return at
Thank you.
1 o'clock.
Thank you.
And certainly if you need Lori to come back up, I'll, to answer questions as you go along, please feel free to just grab her.
Test.
Okay, we're back. Resuming the special open meeting, and at this point in the program, we're on agenda item 6, so staff presentation. We've been provided a set of slides. I don't know. Oh, there they are. So you have to look at the reflection off of this screen to see what slide you're on.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Chief General Counsel Cameron. I'm Ed Relkoff, and I'm here with Brad Borman, our Legal Division Director, and with Jack Sidler, our Acting Engineering Bureau Chief, and we're going to provide our presentation on this issue. Next slide, please, Patrick. Just a quick outline of the Form 440 and the CCN requirements, and I think we've talked about the Form 40. It's a rule, and we've covered all those things. The $8 million minimum, but typically, and I'll show you in the next slide, utilities provide all the 440s, whether they're over or under $8 million. And the CCN is a statute, and we've already noted at 60 days to 9 months, depending on whether there's interveners or not. And the exception for the ordinary course of business comes from within the CCN statute. And just a final thing that we've noted is that PNM filed a CCN for a similar substation, 345 to 115. Okay, next slide, please. I was hoping to have a list of all the 440 filings. There's a lot of new ones, but we're working on putting that on our website. So you will get that. But this is a plot of the 440 filings since 2018. And if you look at 2022 in the blue box at the top left corner, you can see that the number of filings, the dollar value, the cumulative amount is almost doubled in the year since you took office as new commissioners. So they went from 43 to 82 in 2023, and we already have 7 for 2024. And in 2023, we passed $1 billion in CCNs. Typically, the CCNs are for reconducting lines and new poles and.
These are 440s.
I'm sorry, did I say 40? Thanks for correcting me. Yes, 440s. And if you take a look at this scatter chart, you can see that the case we're talking about is on the far right, which is the PNM 440, that orange dot. There is an outlier in 2022, which is EPE, and it's over 140 million, but that was had to deal with a grid mod order that the commission approved that order. So they did file a CCN or a 440 in that case. But this chart just is meant to show that, you know, the majority of the 440 filings are nowhere near the $106 million, with that one exception noted. Next slide, please. This slide, I guess it mirrors what Chair O'Connell, his question in terms of the timeline that we received in December. And we thought that the project may have started in 2021 or 2022, but I think Ms. Williams said it was 2018. So there was a lot of time if PNM wanted to file a CCN. I think we're looking at an 8 or 9 year project now. Next slide, please. PNM's potential customers. We've already seen this chart, and the yellow highlights just recognize similar projects. They involve either the Central New Mexico Rail Park or Huning Park, and they also involve data centers. And those 3 highlighted areas, that's 150 to 750 plus megawatts of new load, just concentrated in those two parks. Next slide, please. Here's just a map of those 2 parks, and you can see in the top left corner that's the Central New Mexico Rail Park. And if you go about to the middle top, you can see that that's part of the Facebook data center. So the point of this chart is that this is an area that has many special services contracts, and the commission just approved one of those for Meta. And now we have 150 to 750 plus megawatts of additional potential data center in these parks, in these 2 parks. Next slide, please. So given that there are special service contracts in that area, in these business parks, I just wanted to note here that the special service contracts, they provide economic development benefits. And the reason that companies sign up for these contracts is that they provide lower rates for renewable energy than utility retail electric rates. And one of the provisions in doing that is that the utility customers don't subsidize the special services contracts or customers through the contracts. And I just cut and pasted a explanation of the rate, but you know, that idea of subsidization is highlighted in the yellow in terms of cost causation and making sure that costs serving these customers are separated from the utility customers, the retail customers. And also as part of that special service rates, there's a substation equipment portion or provision, and it essentially says that if all substations and distribution transformers shall be installed, paid for, owned, operated, and maintained by the customer meaning the special service contract customer. Okay, next slide, please. So a quick summary of staff's concern is, you know, what need does the facility serve? I think Ms. Williams said that there's a lot of different things that the substation can do in terms of serving different types of load and transmission and so forth. So what are we looking at here in terms of that chart of all the different customers? Is this facility serving special services contracts? And given that, the project is going to have many impacts on the system. So it gets pretty complicated in terms of that cost causation and who is using the system to their benefit. I think we talked about the role of Western Spirit Transmission in the letter to the commissioners. And there's issues tied in there that are affiliated with the impacts on the system. And the next bullet is just how will the substation benefit ratepayers and improve system stability? It's not laid out in the 440 filing in terms of how that will happen. And finally, we talked about the estimated cost is $160 million, and who bears $106 million? Yes. And what's the risk if the market does not materialize, and who bears that risk? This is a
Next slide.
next slide, please. Thanks, Patrick. In terms of our recommendation, we understand that we have a shovel-ready project with our PNM does, and it doesn't want to incur additional costs due to delays, and staff is concerned that there could be potentially negative impacts on existing utility ratepayers if there is cross-subsidization. And that's why we recommend that PNM file an application for a CCN so that we can look at all these different complex issues. And you know, we staff sees that PNM can still proceed with the project if the costs aren't not included in its public utility plant and service.
If I may just add a little bit to yeah. Yeah. Staff would add just a few things, or I'd like to add a few things on behalf of staff. PNM had noted that there's no bright line like dollar determination in either the CCN statute or the 440 rule that determines when a CCN needs to be submitted rather than a simple 440 filing. We agree it's not there's no bright line test in that regard. However, staff feels that this is a project of sufficient cost and sufficient impact or the potential impact on the system and a somewhat unique need that this cannot be considered the ordinary course of business. You know, Ms. Williams mentioned multiple times that the primary driver of this of this project is Meta. She noted that the reason that the transformer was ordered in fall of 2022, that was because of the need of Meta to move forward on this. And that this is needed. She also mentioned that this is needed for the Meta project to be served. I think that complicates the issue as to whether or not this is ordinary course of business. This is not simply connecting or adding a substation to connect a couple of renewable projects. This is much different, and we have, it's a much more complicated analysis. And because of that, I think the commission and staff and other potential parties need to be able to review and analyze this before it moves forward. The other thing I'd mention is that ordinary course of business determination, that's not a determination by staff. We're making a recommendation, but we don't determine it. But P&M doesn't determine it either. That determination is ultimately made by the commission, and that is why we're asking you to order a CCN in this case, as this project does not meet the ordinary course of business.
Suggest we could go in reverse order because you had a list of questions and I don't know if you got them all. So you want to start us off, Commissioner Ellison?
Sure. Mr. Wilkoff, you said that in the final slide there that P&M in staff's view can still proceed with the project if the costs are not included in its public utility plant in service. How would that be the case that the costs might not be included in the utility plant in service?
Well, I can at least answer in part from the statutory perspective, and then others might have some input as to the practicalities of it. But the statute 62-9-1, section A basically says no public utility shall begin the construction or operation of any public utility plant without first obtaining from the commission a certificate that public convenience and necessity will require such construction or operation. So it needs a CCN to be public utility plant, but if it's non-public utility plant, then I don't see that this statute would apply.
That if, for example, a customer were to completely pay for it.
I think that's probably what would qualify. Yeah, I mean, it basically would not go into plant and service, utility plant and service. And so it would be, and I'm not an accountant, so I'm probably stretching my knowledge of that area, but if it's not, part of public utility plant and service and not collected in rates, in the utility rates, then I don't think the commission has authority, at least under this section, to require a CCN.
That's good for now.
So the 440, under 440, they have to be filed at least 30 days before construction, right? And so is there anything that precluded P&M from filing earlier than that? Say a year before?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay, thank you. So I want to clarify that part of it. And so, I mean, I think I know the response to this, but just so we're on the same page, can you, so I asked P&M about those substations and how they're similar. Can you explain how those are different and why in those cases there was like a Arroyo San Juan Pajarito and others, a CCN was not requested to be filed by staff.
Thank you, Commissioner Aguilar. I think I mentioned that in my brief summary at the end of our presentation, that those projects did not involve being necessary to serve a special service customer. I mean, this project does. This is kind of unique, at least compared to those. And because there's a special service customer and there are other restrictions in the rules about, and the statute about having utility customers bearing costs for those special service customers, this is a separate kind of project.
So in those other cases, you know, there perhaps wasn't a special service customer, but there was a generator interconnecting. And I guess I would need to ask PNM if any of those were like network upgrades that were assigned to the system. But is it then your view that in that case, the customer paid for everything?
I don't know that I could answer that question. I'd have to look at those cases to see what the decisions were, but I think, again, those were, there were generator interconnections and other project upgrades. These were not intended primarily for to meet the need of a special service customer. And I think that's kind of a whole separate animal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I recognize that it's different. I see similarities in, for example, in FERC's rules for when a customer interconnects, it needs to pay for the customer, the costs that are assigned to it directly. But then the system pays for the network upgrades. Yeah.
And then part of it on the Pajarito substation. That substation was built as part of the Western Spirits line. And that was covered in the CCN filing by PNM to acquire the line.
Mm-hmm.
So at least in my belief, the Pajarito substation was covered by the same CCN.
Okay. And then just to, I guess I want to narrow down on this a little bit more. Is your objection with respect to, and sort of say objection, but desire for the commission to direct PNM to file a CCN, is that because of the cost of the substation overall, which is $106 million about, or is it more a concern about how those costs are going to be allocated?
Yeah, it's both, actually. That was staff's concern.
Okay.
Both those items.
Okay. I think that's all I have for now. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so I just kind of have two buckets of things that I wanted to explore. One, and it's maybe just the way I read the letter, but and then frankly, you guys have said some things here today that make me think I was reading it correctly, but it feels like the standard is the load has to exist before you can invest to serve the load.
I guess I'll take that. I don't know that that's quite the test, but I think there needs to be some certainty that the load's gonna exist. I don't think, obviously if you wait until the load actually exists, you'll never catch up, right? You'll always be chasing it and being behind. So, but I think there needs to be some measure of, or some certainty, reasonable certainty, I guess. And again, that requires judgment. that this load will exist in the foreseeable future, in the reasonable future. I don't think you want to have current customers paying for a project that won't be necessary to serve customers, won't come online for 10 years. I mean, but at the same time, you know, you don't want to always be like, well, we have this need today. It's going to take us 2 years or so to get this built. And by that time, there'll be more customers.
Yeah, I guess where I'm still having trouble with this. The customers, whether they exist today or in the future, benefit from a network of interconnected elements, right?
I agree.
And that in general, when you improve an element of a network, the network improves to the benefit of everything that's connected to it.
Yes.
And then when I read the letter, one of the questions popped in my head is, when's the last time whoever wrote this letter has been to Los Lunas?
It was a joint effort on writing the letter. You've got,
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the problem is I got two
Staff's
signatures. I don't know who wrote it. I don't know who to direct this
So it was
question to.
probably, I can tell you, I've never been to Los Lunas, and I was involved in writing the letter. I don't know if Jack was involved in writing it. I don't know if he's ever been to Los Lunas.
Oh, yeah, I was through Los Lunas when the Steelers played the. I think it was a Sunday night game. I have a friend that lives in Belen, and I went down there, so I went through Los Lunas then. But I've had friends that live in Los Lunas.
I mean, I'm just asking that question because I was through there just a few months ago and was impressed by all the new stuff that is down there. So just from football analogy or sports analogy, it passes the eye test that load's growing down there. And was worried that as a commission, we're just sitting up here in Santa Fe and not paying attention to what's going around statewide. And this, as Commissioner Aguilera has said, for me is not this 440 that I'm thinking about. It's, you know, we've heard SPS having issues trying to get things interconnected through SPP in the Permian Basin. So that's where I'm coming from with these questions. And so that's why this standard that, like, could somebody tell me what solid information means? You know, because the complaint was PNM hadn't provided solid information. What does that mean?
Well, I mean, I'll give you my thoughts, and the other folks up here can supplement it if they like. I think there needs to be some data and some analysis that says, all right, here's our projected load growth. Here's what we have, you know, expected in 2024, 2025, 2026. Here are the projects, and here's why, you know, we project these things. So, and I think we have some of that in this form that I think PNM has a similar form that we have in our presentation about some potential projects. So there needs to be some certainty about this as well. I mean, we had a couple of weeks ago, we had a meeting with PNM in which they discussed that they wanted some way to perhaps be able to meet the needs of projects that may or may not come to the state. And that's a legitimate concern that they had. And we recognize that. But some of these projects are just proposals, right? They may or may not come here. And so we don't know, you know, just the idea that somebody's is looking at us isn't, I don't think, sufficient data for, I think, well, certainly not for staff. And I would like to think not for the commission to say, oh, well, they should go ahead and upscale their system to meet these potential projects. You know, there needs to be some analysis behind that.
Yeah, and that's kind of my concern. It looks like the analysis was reduced to thinking only about Meta.
The analysis on staff's part or on PNM's part?
On staff's part. I mean, that's what I heard come through in this presentation and your comments following Mr. Rilke.
Well, I think that is a function of PNM basically saying they're the driver of this project. That's basically what they have said. They said that they ordered this transformer in fall of 2022 based on a request from Meta. That's, I mean, I'm not making that up.
Right,
That's,
but I mean, even if that's the foundation, Meta is a PNM customer.
and yes, they are. And that's why we think that this is a project that needs more thorough analysis by staff, by the commission, by perhaps other parties. We're not, again, we're not recommending rejecting this. If we have a CCN process, staff may recommend approving it. We just don't know yet because we don't have sufficient information. We haven't had it vetted through a hearing and through sworn testimony. That's what we're trying to do, is get this information so that we can give you the best recommendation we can.
And it's not clear to me if this project began in 2018, what the load growth in Los Lunas was at that time, and you know, if it matched where we are right now, which is pretty significant. So that's another thing, a disconnect that we were looking at.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you, and always more information is at least more information, but sometimes it's better. Utilities have two avenues available to them. Obviously, the 440 filing and the CCN filing. So I guess to take to an extreme, what I was reading in staff's letter, and frankly, what you just said, the 440 filing isn't usable because it isn't a vehicle that allows the amount of information that maybe you're going to want.
We don't think it's usable in a situation like this. I think there are situations that it's perfectly reasonable to use a 440. But I think this particular situation is sufficiently complicated, or, you know, there's a sufficient number of issues that I think the commission and the parties are going to want to sort through, that I think a 440 doesn't provide adequate information or process or the ability to analyze that to move forward.
And our average 440 receipt tends to be reconductoring lines, replacing transformers, replacing breakers, to the tune of $6 to $10 million. Far less than 106 million.
Yeah, I get that. That's what a normal 440 is. But again, if you just look at the records, that's not always the case. And it has been used for substations before. And then when I read the law, it's not that there has to be an exact sync up between load and your knowledge of what's going to happen tomorrow. That we're supposed to regulate in a way that provides utilities opportunity to serve. And that includes readiness. So if you've got somebody that shows up tomorrow and you can build a house quickly, the system should be ready to serve them, right? So that's really the foundation that I was coming from, and I saw an opposite point of view in the letter. So I'm just testing to see if I read the letter right.
I don't know if you read the letter wrong. I do think what we're trying to say is that there is a determination that is ultimately made by the commission as to whether or not a CCN is needed or a 440 filing is sufficient. We think, staff thinks, that in this instance, that a CCN would be necessary. I don't disagree that the utility has the need to serve and should be able to meet future load, as it becomes necessary. I mean, I think that's reasonable. I think you're entirely correct. I do think that there's, I guess, a constant tension that exists, that, between having sufficient capacity to serve this load and overbuilding. And it is judgment. It's judgment of the parties, it's judgment of PNM, it's judgment of the commission in terms of trying to get to the right place. I don't think there's one simple answer that fits all. I think that's why we have these processes, is to work through that.
No, I appreciate that. So then that leads me to the next thing that I heard was that one of the main reasons would want to go down the road of a CCM filing, and frankly, it's only the bullets on this. Is, second bullet on the last slide. Neither 440 nor a CCN is a filing where we're gonna get into cost allocation unless it's a CCN and the utility asks for rate making treatment. Is that correct?
Well, maybe, I mean, again, you'd have to at least determine what the need is and why. And if you have a determination that the need is largely to serve, for instance, a special service customer, you'll at least have information into the record that will demonstrate that, hey, some of these costs should not be assigned to other utility customers.
But knowing that doesn't change the fundamental question is, should it get built or not?
No, it doesn't. Whether it should get built or not is a separate question than that.
Okay. Because I mean, I kind of agree with P&M's observation here that, and first of all, I share with you your concern about cost allocation and making sure that these special service contracts live up to what they're supposed to do. But that's not what I'm trying to communicate here, but just that because that's a concern, forcing this into a CCN doesn't solve that concern.
But having information about why it was built and who it was built for can play in a rate case later on when they are asking for allocation.
I agree, but my point is it doesn't have to be or isn't required to be collected now, no matter what, whether it's a 440 or a CCN, if they don't ask for rate treatment.
I'm just wondering if the issue could be that if this facility is going to be 100% used under a special service contract, should it be built as part of utility plant and service and then argued in a rate case whether the cost allocation is correct or not?
Yeah, I agree. That's an issue to explore. I guess just the question I'm going to ask if that gets brought up is, aren't these special service customers also customers? Just because they have a special service contract doesn't change fundamentally that they're customers of PNM and using the same network that all other PNM customers are using.
I would certainly stipulate that they are customers.
Yes.
Yeah, because I mean, it's just part of my problem was thinking through why didn't I recognize the importance of this issue soon enough. Part of it was the timing of when things happened. Part of it, frankly, was the form of the communication. When I saw the letter from staff, the way it was formatted and delivered, it looked to me like public comment. And then this is and I'm not supposed to use public comment to make decisions, right? So that was one of the things holding me back. Next step was, and I've talked to Mr. Cameron about that, is I know like staff will bring things to the commission's attention and there will be a communication to OGC. OGC will calendar and assign that. And I'm not sure that happened in this instance, because I think we were scrambling to get somebody assigned the last week.
Well, yeah, and we were attempting to follow the 440 rule for notifying the commission.
Yeah, no, I get that. And that's why I'm exploring this process, because I don't want to get to here ever again. And so a lot of it is about timing and what people really feel needs to be reviewed and giving people notice and time so you can review what needs to be reviewed. If a 440 is filed 30 days before the beginning of construction, I mean, that doesn't give staff a lot of time to review it and to submit something to the commission about it. And it's especially, as I think somebody raised previously, especially problematic when it's over the holidays.
you're missing a couple of days there, right?
Well, and staff was working on the same case that.
Well, we were, but I mean, but yeah, I mean, but even in the best of circumstances, it's a tight time frame.
Right, and that's really what I'm exploring. Did we use our 30 days as well as we could have? And so part of it is the format of the filing communicates how important it is to me anyway. And so then the next part of it is I'm waiting to hear OGC tell me, hey, here's something you need to get involved in a situation like this. And so do I need to change or do we need a different process is the question I'm sitting here asking myself right now. Okay, so anyway, I think that's my list of questions there.
Okay, I have a few more questions. In looking at the Village of Los Lunas website, they say that the population has grown by 47.8% since 2000. I've also driven through and was after not having been there for a long time, and it definitely looks different. It's grown. And so here you have 1,300 megawatts of potential customers that have inquired about obtaining service in the future, and almost 3,000 megawatts of interconnection requests, which, having worked on that in a previous life, I know some of those are speculative. But does this not, are you not convinced that there is a need for this substation aside from the cost, which I think and I agree with the chairman that, there are separate questions that we're asking at separate times in the proceedings, but in terms of the need and need to accommodate growth, reliability need, do you question whether the substation is needed?
I think when we looked at the data, which is an earlier table of this, and Meta wasn't mentioned specifically, but there's clearly a need, but it doesn't, we couldn't tell what the substation, which need it was serving. Is this specifically for Meta or is this for the retail customers? And that gets back to the earlier comment on if it's 100% for Meta, should it be included in 440? And
Yeah, and that's really the weirdness I was trying to get at. Isn't a special service contract customer also a retail customer?
I think they're a retail customer, but I mean, they're subject to a separate set of kind of requirements, and among them being that they pay for those.
Right, it's a cost allocation.
It's a cost allocation.
But if you've got a retail customer that has a need, it doesn't matter if they have a special service contract or not.
I agree. I mean, I think there's still a need. The question was the nature of the need. What was the nature of the need? And we wanted to make sure that, and we felt it was important to make sure that the nature of the need got fully fleshed out. Yeah, and that's why we are recommending a CCN process.
Yeah, and so that's why I loop back to what the chair said earlier. Isn't the cost allocation taken care of in a rate proceeding? Or in,
it can be taken care of in a CCN process as the statute points out. I think it was the chairman noted that the utility may ask for, the determination of rate making treatment.
Right, but I mean, I think we can, they weren't requesting for it in a 440 filing, so they may not request it in a CCN either. And so I guess I want to get back to the obligation to serve and see how you see that. Do you think that the utility needs to have a formal request on hand to meet that, or do you think that the utility is within its rights to determine what is a realistic need that is coming up, like growth?
You know, I don't know, because not all of it will be subject to a formal request, right? If you're, if it's, for instance, residential growth, you're not gonna have every homeowner coming with a petition to PNM to provide service, right? I think though there needs to be, you know, some sort of support for that the utility would provide that demonstrates that there is this growth coming, some sort of evidence beyond, well, we think that we're gonna grow 10% over the next 2 years. You know, I think there needs to be something else. And I think that's why we have an evidentiary record. So people provide testimony and provide their analysis in that testimony, and that analysis gets examined, sometimes challenged, and the commission then reviews it and says, okay, we think that there is sufficient need, or no, we don't think that they've demonstrated sufficient need.
I'd also like to add that special service contracts are voluntary. So in terms of the obligation to serve, it's not a requirement for the utility.
I think you're saying that they're not required to enter one. Is that
Yes.
correct? Yes.
Okay,
They still have to.
but they
serve
would,
the customer.
yeah, they would still need to serve the customer. Okay, I mean, I guess for me, just, in my preliminary research, it seems like there's a lot of potential development here. And I think even if you cut this into like 10% coming to fruition, there's still a lot of development here. I think that's all I have.
I might follow just a couple other questions, on the figure you presented on page 3 with the 440 filings. Could you do the same figure, but only I guess take out the ones with a separate review process, like, if there was a separate grid mod order that covered it, or if there was a PPA that was associated with the substation. In other words, what I'm trying to get at is, what were the projects where there was no review other than the Form 440 filings? I think that would be an interesting look at things.
I think I know what you're asking. I don't know. I mean, I imagine there's a process to do that, but I don't know what it is.
Well, that would, right.
I think it would require looking at each of these projects and
Make
identifying.
determination. Okay.
Yeah.
And back to this allocation of cost question, we heard from PNM that it would most likely be classified as a system asset, and so some portion would be paid by FERC customers, some portion by retail customers, and even possibly some portion by Meta, the direct customer. Do you have a sense of how that would actually play out?
Are you asking the percentages?
Yes.
I don't have any idea.
That's one of our questions.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I think agenda wise, we've inched into the next item, which is discussion, potential action. And I guess while we get into discussion potential action, I still have one more question for staff. If you guys could put on your advocate for the public interest hat on, move beyond the letter and the recommendation, and recognize that we have a situation where the information provided shows that it's time sensitive, let's put it that way, to regulate a system that's ready to serve. What would be your recommendation on how we proceed?
I hope this is the non-buzzy one. Okay. Yeah. I think staff would recommend moving forward with a CCN. I do think it would be appropriate for the commission to try to expedite the process to meet the timelines that are identified in what PNM has provided. I mean, I think I would not anticipate that this would be the sort of CCN that would be resolved in 60 days. I think that would be awful fast in this situation. I do think it's something that could be resolved in somewhere between 4 to 6 months. So if the commission wished to enter an order that would authorize or mandate an expedited process, certainly we would not oppose that. I do think, and I would, maybe this is simply defense of staff's position, I do think we do always look at the public interest, and I think the public interest in this case is served by us bringing this before you and asking you to make this determination as to how you wish to proceed. At the very least, you know, we've been able to hash it out today and hopefully get many of your questions answered, both by us and by PNM, and have a better understanding of how you'd like to proceed on this, and not just in this case, but perhaps in future cases. So and that I believe is within the public interest.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And in fact, that's exactly why I was questioning myself on how I received the letter that you wrote, right? Because it is, thank you for bringing the issue forward. I mean, I think you heard today, it's an open question, and I think we need to figure out how to move forward in a way that not only addresses the problem we're faced with today, but provides more certainty for world going forward. And that's why I was hitting on these fuzzy definitions of solid information and those kind of things. So anyway, no defense needed. And I think you did your job. It's more about how do we do the job next time? And then I guess next step, just kind of frame up this agenda item. What I'm hoping is commissioner discussion on what we want to do next, just boundaries of what we can do next. We have it noticed as potential action. We have some potential orders drafted up. Because that exists, I don't think we have to make a decision today. We could decide if we want to take an action at this point to put it on the agenda for next Thursday. I think we're still within reasonable timeliness if that's an option too. So anyway, I don't want to go into this discussion treating us the way PNM treats us and say we have to do something right now. So having said that, I guess I'll just throw out there where I think we're at is whether we require a CCN or not, we do need some more information. I think quite a bit of new information was provided today. Is it enough to decide, hey, a 440 works in this situation and let's address the future another way, or whether, nope, it doesn't work in this situation, so we need to do CCN now. I'm not ready to pick between the 440 or CCN now. I'm also, because of the time frame of a CCN, that's why I was asking you that question, Mr. Borman, is I'm afraid just opening that box means a process that's longer than it needs to be just because of what it is. So anyway, that's what I'm offering to start the discussion with.
Yeah, I would say, let's not do anything today, and if we do, it should be for either the next agenda or the one after. You know, I think part of what we need to think about is what is it that we are gonna get out of a CCN? Is it just the decision to move forward and then not answer anything about rate allocation? And that's a likely path forward, right? Because I think it appears that we might not get to any rate questions. And so I do see value though in answering just the responding to the need for utilities to have certainty as to what we're looking for. We've talked to a great length about, maybe this should have been filed before. I think there are good arguments for that, but I think we also need to recognize that that there has been a practice that we've had, and it creates confusion, right? When we are okay with certain things being filed through 440 and then we raise an issue suddenly, and maybe this is different. Not entirely convinced that it is, but maybe it is. And just to cover myself, I do want to emphasize what Commissioner Ellison said earlier about them not being mutually exclusive. I think that's correct. Anyway, I think we should think about what it is that we want to get out of this, but also think about what guidance it is that we're trying to give so that there is no uncertainty. I don't, because if I think if you take, the argument that a CCN is required to the extreme, then we're reviewing every little thing. And I don't think that is what we want to do. The utility needs a certain level of deference to determine what their system needs, where the growth is, and where they need to be prepared. It's easy to put them in a catch-22 to say, you need to be prepared, but then also, don't be prepared when it's going to cost a lot of money. And so a lot of things to think about that I would rather not think about in the next 20 minutes.
All in here to give you time to finish writing over there.
Thanks. A major motivation for having this meeting today as opposed to waiting until next Thursday was in order to give us time to get more information about the project and potentially take some sort of action ahead of the start of construction. I feel that this, although there is not that bright line about projects, what constitutes ordinary course of business, to me, a project of this dollar magnitude and at this 345 kV level, really crosses the threshold, and I think it merits further evaluation. We've already learned a great deal more today than we received previously, which is great. But I think in my mind, this project merits a CCN, and I would agree that we should, if we do that, work to do so in a expedited manner to avoid problems in serving load. So from my perspective, I would be prepared to support an order that would require the CCN today, because I am a proponent of giving the company clarity. And I think, the sooner we give them clarity, the better off this process is going to be. If we let this opportunity slide and just talk about it today and then talk about it at future meetings, I think that P&M will still be in this status of uncertainty, because we haven't said it's okay to proceed without a CCN. We haven't said anything, and they're going to wonder, should we go ahead and start construction? Should we not start construction? Could there be a potential prudency question going forward? I think that we and P&M are better off if we just provide them clarity and provide them an expedited process in light of the apparent customer need and contractual obligations that they've undertaken.
Yeah, so just a couple of questions about that. Is requiring a CCN the only way to provide clarity?
I don't know. I think it would be, as far as I understand, that is the only way to really evaluate the project without it going into construction potentially. So if there is another way to say, look, maybe they should pause this project while we evaluate it, then I'm open to that. But my understanding is that the CCN is a clear route.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also agree with your statement that us providing some clarity on this project is important. And I agree with that too. I guess where I'm at on that is I'd like to take some time to look at the order requiring a CCN to make sure that what gets issued, if that's what we choose to do, reflects the value of today's conversation. So that's why I'm a fan of, let's put it on the agenda for Thursday, because then that gives us time to take what's already there, review it, make sure it is the CCN we would want to see. Also gives us time to answer that question. Is there another way to provide the clarity that's needed? And I think after today, at a minimum, we should affirm that, yeah, 440 works for this project. So to me, those are kind of the obvious goalposts. There might be space outside of those goalposts that make sense, but I'm just not sitting here in a position right now to feel good about putting the hammer down.
But just to be clear, we haven't provided any guidance today as to whether the 440 is sufficient or whether the CCN is needed. We've raised a lot of questions.
Wholeheartedly agree. We kicked up a bunch of dust bunnies. So I guess back to you, Commissioner Aguilera, you got, can we work with Commissioner Ellison's suggestion of, doing something today, or would you prefer waiting a few days?
Well, I understood, hopefully I'm not remembering wrong, but I don't think the January 22nd was a hard date. I understood that, you know, PNM wanted to start by the end of this month, I think. And so is that accurate? Yeah, there's a thumbs up. So I think we have, you know, I think we could put it on the agenda. Or whatever options, right? Our staff helps us come up with, or discuss to do nothing on Thursday, but I think we could do it on Thursday, and that would be my preference. And also part of it is I know staff provided us some orders, but I would need some more time to, you know, to read them and make sure that I agree with everything that's in there or not.
Yeah, I would say, again, I'm wholeheartedly in agreement with you, Commissioner Ellison, that certainty is important here. In fact, that was one of the reasons why I was very happy we had this meeting today. I also think one of the clearest ways we provide certainty is by issuing orders. So if that's the case, then maybe CCN just for that reason, so we can write a good order that describes what happened here. But having said that, I think I would prefer if we just put it on the agenda for Thursday and work with council that's here today on taking another look at what's in there and answer that question. Is there another way to provide certainty that isn't a final order in a docketed case? Maybe there isn't. I just don't know. Okay, so I don't think we need a motion to do nothing. But I'll go ahead. I've got, just would love to wrap this up with some concluding remarks. I don't know if you have any more you'd like to say, or, and if you do, please do it, but, or if you've got some concluding remarks.
I mean, I just generally speaking, there are so many customers that, you know, are asking for some sort of service, either load or generators. I don't want to treat any of them differently. And yeah, I think as the chair alluded to earlier, I also read the letter as singling out a single customer. And I just want to make sure that we're treating everybody the same. I guess that would be my concluding remark.
And you know, I've said this before, so maybe there's no need, but you know, I would much rather be in the position of a utility coming to us early and giving us plenty of notice about, you know, projects of this magnitude. You know, I really don't want to be in the position of feeling this type of choice between evaluating something properly or allowing the customer to be served properly. It's not really a fair choice to the commission. So I think everyone is better served if we get more indication early of major plans.
Thank you. And then I just, the word that keeps rattling through my head through our 2.5 hours of conversation is just minimums. I mean, this is a lot about minimums, like 30 days is the minimum amount of time to file a 440 before construction. It doesn't have to be that way. $8 million is the minimum for filing a 440, doesn't have to be that way. Whether you've got solid information that one customer requires a device is the minimum amount of information to establish a need. So either you have established the need or you haven't, it's the whole concept of can't be half pregnant, so do you have to show the need for the whole thing or just that it's got to happen, so those are the kind of things that I think have come up over and over again today. And so living in this land of minimums is, I think, part of the reason we got here. So think bigger and broader and go back to the PUA. And I appreciate what you said, Ms. Williams, about raising your family here in New Mexico. That is a piece of the public interest that we have to think about here. So anyway, that's what I'm walking away from today, in addition to all the regulatory things that we've talked about. So I will move to adjourn.
Second.
And voice vote.
I
Thank you.